From the very first moments of camp, the impact is impossible to ignore as Caitlin Clark returns to the floor alongside Kelsey Mitchell and Aaliyah Boston, instantly delivering the sense of relief this passionate fanbase has been desperately waiting for. And after months of uncertainty surrounding Mitchell's future along with growing concerns about locker room chemistry following a turbulent offseason, this reunion quickly restores a clear and undeniable truth. This roster possesses the offensive firepower to compete with anyone in the league, with Mitchell arriving in elite form and perfectly complementing Clark's unmatched gravitational pull on the court to form arguably the most dangerous backcourt in the WNBA, as both guards confidently extend their range well beyond the arc, pushing defenses to their absolute breaking point and forcing opposing coaches into no-win pick-and-roll situations. Commit to slowing Clark and Mitchell cuts through the defense. Overcommit to Mitchell and Clark fires from deep without hesitation, yet as any true student of the game knows, talent alone doesn't win championships. It's all about how it's used, which shifts the spotlight to a quietly impactful presence seen early in practice footage, a player who could completely redefine the second unit's identity, Monique Billings.
Okay, we got Kelsey, we got Sophie and KK back. Hey man, I'm ready for this, bro. I'm ready for the season to start. It's been, you know how much time we've waited to see Caitlin Clark back on the WNBA floor. I'm excited for this, man. I'm excited.
Beyond the surface-level reactions from casual fans and mainstream analysts who dismiss the Monique Billings signing as a routine depth move, a steady veteran meant to fill minutes, support the locker room, and clean up the glass, the reality reveals a far more calculated strategy. Because anyone who truly studies the game and paid close attention to the Team USA camp footage from just a month ago can immediately recognize the tactical value behind this decision, and to fully understand Billings' impact, the distinction between vertical and horizontal spacing becomes essential, as Caitlin Clark embodies elite horizontal spacing by simply crossing half court and forcing defenders to extend outward to respect her deep shooting range, while Aaliyah Boston commands the interior with dominant post presence, consistently drawing double teams and collapsing defenses toward the paint. Yet what the Indiana Fever clearly lacked last season was genuine vertical spacing, an athletic rim runner capable of slipping screens, rising above defenders, and finishing lobs at the peak in pick-and-roll actions, which is exactly where Monique Billings fits seamlessly into the equation. And during the Team USA camp, the chemistry between Clark and Billings in pick-and-roll situations was instant, fluid, and highly effective, showcasing the exact type of dynamic Clark thrives alongside. A big who attacks the rim aggressively and operates above it with confidence, and Billings checks every one of those boxes, and if the coaching staff fully commits to this approach, the Clark-Billings high pick-and-roll could evolve into a core element of the Fever's transition offense, providing Aaliyah Boston with crucial rest without sacrificing interior presence, making it an almost ideal tactical pairing, with their early reconnection in camp only strengthening the outlook for this offensive system. However, even as the front office seems to be making smart progress, it simultaneously introduces legitimate concerns with decisions that feel just as questionable, leading directly into one of the most puzzling and high-risk roster moves of the offseason, centered around Justine Pat. And to truly understand why this decision carries potential consequences, a deeper look into the complexities of the WNBA's new collective bargaining agreement becomes necessary.
Monique Billings, okay. Oh yeah, that's the connection right there. That's gonna be, listen, Monique Billings is gonna be huge for this team. You see Monique Billings and Caitlin Clark right here. Gonna be a pivotal, gonna be an important part of the team's success. We saw Monique Billings.
Coming out of the draft, the Indiana Fever made a sharp move by selecting Justine Pat, a 6'4" elite shooter from Vanderbilt. As for a team desperately needing size, length, and reliable floor spacing at the power forward position, bringing in a stretch four with her skill set was undeniably a strong scouting decision. But instead of securing that asset on the standard 12-player roster, the front office took an unexpected turn by placing her on a developmental contract. And that's where the real issue starts to surface, because under the new CBA, Teams can carry 2 developmental players alongside the main roster, allowing them to practice, travel, and even play in up to 12 games without affecting the already tight salary cap, which at first glance appears to be a smart financial maneuver, yet the key risk lies in the fine print. As developmental players remain essentially unprotected free agents rather than fully secured pieces of the franchise, meaning if Justine Pat gets preseason opportunities, proves her worth, and begins consistently knocking down three-pointers while showcasing true floor spacing ability at 6 feet 4 inches at the professional level, the Fever could suddenly find themselves in a highly vulnerable and risky position. At that stage, the danger becomes impossible to ignore because any team across the WNBA can immediately step in, offer her a standard contract, and pull her away without hesitation. Organizations like the New York Liberty, Las Vegas Aces, or Connecticut Sun, teams that clearly recognize the high value of size paired with shooting, could quickly take advantage and strip Indiana of a near-perfect roster fit, which naturally raises a serious question about why the Fever would put themselves in such a preventable situation with a player whose skill set directly fixes one of their biggest weaknesses, and the answer points straight toward clear roster mismanagement, especially with an overload of undersized guards, as the backcourt is already crowded, yet they still added Raven Johnson, a 5 feet 8 inches defensive-focused guard, despite already having players like Tasha Harris, Kelsey Mitchell, and Lexi Hull, ultimately choosing redundancy instead of securing a 6 feet 4 inches floor spacer on a guaranteed deal. And in today's WNBA, where spacing is critical, lacking a power forward who can stretch the floor weakens the entire offensive structure, allowing defenses to collapse into the paint and place constant pressure on Aaliyah Boston, which is exactly the problem Justine Pat was positioned to solve. Making the decision to leave her on an unprotected developmental contract while maintaining a surplus of guards feel like a clear misuse of roster value, and if another team acts quickly and signs her within weeks, the responsibility falls completely on the front office. But this imbalance is only the surface of a much deeper issue within the organization, because while everything may appear positive on the outside, the real challenge begins behind closed doors when practices intensify, competition rises, and underlying tensions inevitably come to light.
Here it says, this is courtesy of Robin Lundberg, Sports Illustrated. What Justine Pisot's developmental deal says about Indiana Fever's roster plan. Okay, the Indiana Fever signed one of their WNBA draft picks to a developmental contract. Okay, the Indiana Fever made some noteworthy selections in the WNBA draft. The Fever took point guard Raven Johnson of South Carolina with the 10th pick in the first round.
In recent days, the ongoing breakdown of head coach Stephanie White's remarks has started to reveal something far more serious than a minor concern, because when you truly analyze the language coming from this staff, it begins to resemble a significant tactical issue rather than simple experimentation, as this is no longer just about casually moving Caitlin Clark off the ball. They are deliberately constructing a roster that places one of the greatest playmakers in women's basketball into a small forward role, and the indicators have been present for over a year when properly connected, especially right after the draft when Stephanie White carefully detailed her guard rotation using precise terminology, labeling Tasha Harris as a combo guard, describing Caitlin Clark as a player capable of functioning both on and off the ball, and most notably identifying rookie Raven Johnson as a true point guard. And when a coach confidently assigns that role to a defense-first rookie while framing a generational MVP-level talent as more of a versatile wing, it reflects a clear and intentional strategic commitment rather than a temporary trial, pointing toward a perimeter structure where Johnson initiates at the 1, Mitchell or Harris occupies the 2, and the 6-foot Caitlin Clark shifts into the 3 position, ultimately setting up a deeper and far more complex basketball implication that cannot be overlooked. The concept of a true point guard in today's heliocentric era of basketball is quickly fading into irrelevance, and Stephanie White's apparent commitment to that traditional structure feels increasingly outdated because in the modern game, a pass-first guard who simply initiates offense and then fades into the background becomes redundant when a dominant, all-controlling playmaker is already on the floor, as the league has clearly shifted away from that model with players who may not fit the classic 5 feet 10 inches point guard mold, yet still dictate their team's entire offensive flow. And when a player possesses that level of scoring gravity, vision, and control, Placing the ball in someone else's hands only restricts the system rather than enhancing it, which is exactly why Caitlin Clark fits the heliocentric model so perfectly, making any attempt to remove her from primary control a direct limitation of the most dangerous weapon available, and while she is fully capable of spacing the floor and operating off the ball, doing so ultimately takes away the very qualities that make her elite, with a negative impact becoming even more pronounced when factoring in Aaliyah Boston, because if a low-volume perimeter shooter like Raven Johnson is tasked with initiating the offense, defenders will instinctively sag off, collapse into the paint and crowd-driving lanes, and since the effectiveness of the Clark Boston pick-and-roll relies heavily on Clark's shooting gravity to stretch defenses and create interior space for Boston, reducing Clark to a stationary role eliminates that advantage entirely, meaning that in an attempt to fix perimeter defense issues, this strategy unintentionally damages interior efficiency, transforming what should be a core strength into a self-created weakness. Looking at last season's numbers, the reality becomes impossible to overlook. Whenever Caitlin Clark controlled the offense as the primary ball handler, the Indiana Fever produced an impressive plus 6.4 net rating, playing with pace, fluidity, and elite efficiency. But the instant that control shifted away from her, the offense noticeably slowed and turned far more predictable and average. And when both the analytics and the on-court product clearly support one approach, it naturally raises the question of why the front office appears committed to a direction that contradicts it, which points toward the deeper psychology within sports management, where this situation begins to resemble a familiar conflict between system and superstar, as coaches and executives often seek recognition as the architects of success, and Stephanie White's preference for a structured, defense-oriented system reflects that mindset. Because when a team features a player like Caitlin Clark, someone capable of transcending traditional frameworks, it can create internal tension around control and identity, since fully unleashing her natural playstyle tends to center the credit on the player, while success within a rigid system shifts attention toward the coaching philosophy, and that subtle but powerful dynamic can influence decision-making in meaningful ways, especially when it leads to hesitation in adapting to a player's strengths, ultimately affecting not only on-court strategy but also how the organization is perceived by a fan base that is closely analyzing every move.
And Caitlin Clark at small forward, best believe I'm going to address it. But up until then, I'm going to root for Raven Johnson the same way I root for all the Indiana Fever players to play well, because I root for Caitlin Clark. So I hope Raven Johnson is out there locking people down, making spot-up jump shots, passing Caitlin Clark the ball and getting the hell out of her way. So I'm going to root for her until further notice, okay? Now, here it says,
it becomes increasingly difficult to separate the Indiana Fever's on-court concerns from the growing cultural tension off the floor, because while the coaching staff appears focused on limiting their superstars' natural influence, the front office has simultaneously fueled frustration by clashing with the very fan base driving the franchise's surge. As senior advisor and longtime architect Lynn Dunn recently addressed supporters in a tone that felt dismissive, framing criticism as negativity rather than genuine engagement, which struck a nerve with a community that has invested both financially and emotionally largely because of Caitlin Clark's arrival. And this is far from a typical fan base, with many new and highly engaged supporters directly contributing to rising ticket sales, merchandise demand, and overall visibility, meaning when they question roster moves or tactical decisions, it reflects a level of involvement most organizations actively encourage, yet treating that engagement as a problem instead of an asset risks creating a widening disconnect, since in modern sports fan feedback is part of the ecosystem rather than a threat, and failing to recognize that reality can make an organization appear increasingly out of touch, and the situation only escalates further beyond the court, highlighted by reactions that deepen this divide, including a recent moment involving veteran Erica Wheeler, where comments perceived as dismissive toward critics, many of them everyday fans investing time and money into the team, only added to the frustration, and for a fan base that has played a significant role in the league's recent financial growth, from increased salaries to heightened visibility, that kind of tone feels especially disconnected from the reality surrounding the team. Taking a step back to view the full picture, a concerning pattern begins to emerge as the coaching staff entertains questionable tactical decisions, front office figures lean into narratives that sidestep fundamental basketball issues. Leadership voices push against fan criticism, and even player comments risk distancing the very supporters behind the team's rise, creating a sense that multiple layers of the organization are out of sync with the audience, driving their momentum and widening a noticeable cultural gap. And with training camp now underway, the stakes extend far beyond simple preparation, evolving into a defining test of identity and direction, where the real questions start to take shape the moment the first 5-on-5 scrimmage begins. Who truly controls the game? Who dictates the pace? And which vision ultimately defines the future of this team? With the season rapidly approaching, the spotlight intensifies on Stephanie White as she faces a defining moment that will not only shape this year's outcome but also establish the long-term identity of the Indiana Fever, because the path forward splits into two sharply contrasting directions, either fully empowering Caitlin Clark as the centerpiece of a dynamic, fast-paced offensive system built to overwhelm opponents, or continuing to lean into a structured, defense-first approach that risks conflicting with the modern pace and space evolution of the game. And this decision carries even greater weight when viewed against a league that is constantly adapting, where top teams are maximizing their stars rather than restricting them, forcing Indiana to confront whether they are truly optimizing their greatest asset or holding it back. And as the Fever walk this fine line between unlocking elite potential and unintentionally limiting their ceiling, the pressure only builds, especially with internal choices beginning to create friction not just within the roster but also with a deeply invested and rapidly growing fan base. And with time running out before the regular season begins, the focus now shifts entirely to what actually delivers results on the court. Who controls the pace, how the offense flows, and whether the system aligns with the team's natural strengths or forces an identity that doesn't quite fit. Bringing the biggest questions into sharp focus. Does moving Clark away from her natural role disrupt the spacing that allows Aaliyah Boston to dominate inside? Is the front office overthinking a championship window that demands urgency? And can the organization unify its vision before those internal tensions start translating into real consequences? Because at this stage, every decision becomes critical. Every adjustment carries impact. And the difference between reaching their full potential or falling short will come down to recognizing what truly makes this team dangerous. So, if you want more deep breakdowns like this, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay locked in for what comes next.